Hey, welcome back to my yard. Today's focus is roses, specifically pruning your roses. This time of year, late winter, very early spring, President's Day, I start hearing a lot of folks chatter. When do you prune your roses? When do you prune your roses? You know, some will say, President's Day, that's the time to prune your roses. When the forsythia blooms, that's the time to prune your roses. When your hyacinth bloom, that's the time to prune your roses. You know, the best time to prune your roses is late winter, early spring. These things, when the forsythia blooms, President's Day, those are things that you should have ingrained in your brain. So when you see it, you remember, hey, it's time to check on the roses. And depending on the winter you've had, it might actually be time to prune the roses. The best way though, is be looking for growth. When you've got 1 to 2 inches of new growth on your rose bushes, that's the time that you should prune your roses. However, I would check the weather forecast for your area and make sure that you're not in for a spell of really cold, frigid temps that's gonna just, knock it back. Possibly in that situation, you'd want to wait a little while yet. So a couple cold nights, a couple frosts, not a big deal. Okay, so let's get to pruning our roses. Well, I couldn't have picked a better backdrop to really help the canes blend in and make it difficult for you to see. However, you can see here, we've got new growth. Ooh, we're getting a lot of new growth here on this rose bush. We had a mild winter here. There's still a lot of leaves from last year. All right, so before we get started, get some gloves, put on a long sleeve shirt. You don't want to get all scratched up. Okay, well, if you have a helper, be cautious of your helper. All right, so here we have our rose bush. Now some will say, go through and remove all of last year's foliage. You want to remove all of last year's foliage, but if you can see where you're at, why not just prune first and then remove what's left over? It saves a lot of time that way. Use a clean pair of shears and make sure to wipe it with a alcohol swab in between bushes so you're not taking something from one bush to the next bush. And make sure whatever you're cutting off your roses gets put in your yard waste or otherwise disposed. Do not put it in your compost. The thorns are just going to be nasty, but more importantly, the pests. So you're looking for an open center. The first thing that I recommend doing is going through and removing all the small branches, the ones that are, say, thinner than a pencil. They have no strength to them. So remove those from your bush. No, Ginger, we're not going to eat them. While you're in there, find the dead canes. The dead dry canes, you'll want to remove those completely. You'll know it's, how do I know if it's dead? So when you cut into it, if it's green, it's alive. If it's brown and dry, it's dead. Anything that's coming into the center, we're going to remove. We want to make sure we have a nice open center to allow for airflow. This one down here is still alive. One thing I check is to see, do I have any branches growing from below the knot? Roses most commonly are grafted, and you'll have a knot. That's the knot, the kind of a ball where everything's growing out of. If you get a sucker or a shoot that comes up from underneath it, you're not getting the flower that you purchased. You are getting what it was, the rootstock that it was grafted onto. And that might not be ideal for you. So here we have a nice cane coming out. This one crosses, so we're going to cut that off. That's a little baby from the one behind. We're going to remove that. And these are all kind of smaller ones. Lastly, we're going to decide where we're going to cut it from a height standpoint. The higher you cut it, especially when you're working with a hybrid tea, the shorter the stems on the flowers. If you cut them lower, as they grow, oftentimes you'll get a longer stem, which is going to be great for cut roses. Just for symmetry, I'm going to clip this one right about here, but I'm going to look for a growth node where a shoot's coming out. Here's one here pointing this way. Here's one pointing inside. Here's one pointing that way. And what I'm looking for is one that's going to point out or off to the side. You know, I like this one. It's going to point out that way and not cross over anything that's going to grow here. So I'm going to cut that right there. Then lastly, I'll remove the rest of the foliage. And now I will move through and I will get the rest of my rose bushes. But see how I've left it? So it's an open center where I cut a cane. I made sure that the growth point was pointing out, not into the center. And now I'll see how that grows. And I may give that a little maintenance throughout the spring. Until it gets another 2 to 3 inches and our temperatures have warmed up, I won't fertilize. And when I do, I choose to go with a systematic fertilizer that you mix in every 5 to 6 weeks into the soil around the base of it, and it helps treat it for aphids as well as fertilizes the rose. So that's the process that I'm going to use, and that has worked really well for me. So the goal is to have an open center. Now, roses won't always cooperate with the right number of canes, but open center, nothing crossing. We'll go through, trim that all up, removed all the foliage. Oh, there's Ginger checking on us. And then we'll keep an eye on that this spring as it starts to grow and make modifications. What? No, you don't say. Okay. I hope you found this helpful. Obviously, if you've got a climbing rose, different miniature rose, you're going to modify your pruning a little bit. But bottom line, you want to remove last year's foliage. You want to remove the dead canes. Find the knot at the base of the rose. Remove anything that was growing from below that. This is now a good time also just to check and see if soil or compost is piled up. Try to keep that knot above the soil, and then you won't have those suckers growing up from the rootstock. So I hope you enjoyed this. The sun is setting, so it's time for me to go inside. Give me a like, give me a subscribe. Hey, did you check out the bucket back there? We're forcing rhubarb. Check that out.